What's up, y'all? Emergency edition Coast to Coast podcast here. You know what it means? That means there's breaking news. I wish I had a sounder for it like we do on the radio show with Tommy Ashley, but I don't have one. So just imagine there's one right here. And you know that we're breaking news here on the Coast to Coast from Inside Carolina. I'm Joey Powell. We are brought to you by Congruity and Inside Carolina's best friend and haberdasher, Johnny T-shirt. All right, Sherrell McMillan, Sean Moran are here because Ven-Allen Lubin from Vanderbilt entered the transfer portal pretty late in the game, but has committed to Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels. Vitals on Mr. Lubin, 6'8", 220. I think that 6'8" might be a little bit stretching it, but either way, he played power forward for the Commodores, and former head coach Tar Heel Jerry Stackhouse um, in the as a prospect. He was a just outside the top 100 from the state of Florida at Orlando Christian Prep, and was rated about a 90, which is a solid 4 stars. Sherrell, I'm going to ask you the question I always ask you whenever we get a commitment, whether it's a kid coming from high school or a kid transferring in. How did we get here?
I think a lot of it, you have to tell the story of UNC's portal season thus far, which has been, frankly, a few misses at the five. Jonas Adu and Cliff Amore, I think, are the two that we would really consider misses by the UNC staff. And so once that happened, they had to pivot. They had to change kind of what they were looking for because there weren't many other 6'11", 6'10" guys who could rebound, who fit the bill exactly like they wanted. Those guys are either already committed somewhere for whatever one of a 6 or 7 things on UNC's checklist vetting process didn't make it through. And so they came out with a few guys, and one of them was Ven-Allen Lubin. And I think it says that they are looking for someone who, at least offensively, can play with their back to the basket, because on the current roster, they really don't have anyone who has that as a strength. Let's put it that way. Um, there were times last year when Baycott, Armando Baycott, when he wasn't playing well, they would go to Harrison Ingram in the post. Well, both of those guys are gone, and we know that Jalen Washington, more so than anything, likes to face up. He likes to get the ball in the post and face up and hit that mid-range jumper. So they were looking for someone who could. I guess let me go back. They were looking for someone from the beginning who could either start over Jalen Washington and play 30, 33 minutes a game, or at worst, someone who could complement him in the post. And I think Lubin is able to do that. And I think that's kind of how the attraction to him started. Like Sean said, like you said, Joey, he entered the portal pretty late. And, we've seen a trend where UNC talks to guys who they're familiar with or they have a connection with through maybe a former coach or an alum of UNC, and they had that with Stackhouse, like you mentioned. So between all that, they were able to get him on campus and then get a commitment from him. And I think they have fulfilled their objective of finding someone who can help in the post, and that was the goal. And I think he is a compliment for Jalen Washington.
I think there's been some pretty healthy discourse on Inside Carolina's message boards about what Lubin will do for this roster. I think your analogy of him being a complement in the post as opposed to trying to shoehorn him into a numbered position might be an easier way to view his addition to the roster. Sean, you did a really good write up, kind of a scouting report, so to speak, of Lubin once it became clear that he was one of the folks that were on UNC's reset radar. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you see in him, how you think he plugs into the roster, and maybe some pluses and minuses that you think fans can expect when he suits up for the Tar Heels.
Yeah, I think for Lubin, 6'8", as we said, maybe shade under 6'8", predominantly played undersized 5 at Vanderbilt. I think slots into that. Maybe going back to Roy Williams, how he liked to have 3 bigs that could rotate in or out, and I think he's a 4'5", 5'4". Once again, giving how he plays, how he plays and moves both offensively and defensively. As Sherrell mentioned, very comfortable in the post. That's probably his preferred area. He can step out a little bit, made 13 threes this past year. Definitely not a key strength yet, but he did show improvement from that freshman to sophomore year. He's comfortable, not to the extent of Jalen Washington of the turn and face, but he does have that to his game. Pretty long wingspan, maybe a little above Harrison Ingram's in terms of what he's at, which once again I think has been showcased on the offensive and defensive glass. So he's a solid rebounder. He's physical. He's tough. But I think the key word is complement versus being that bona fide, true starter, 5-man that UNC really needed. But at that point, I think between Washington, Zayden High, and Lubin, right now those are 3 guys plus Withers that you can mix in different spots. And then last year at Vanderbilt, he did have a big freshman year at Notre Dame to Vanderbilt leap that he showcased, and over his last 12 games in the SEC, 10 of them were double-digit scoring performances. But he's definitely not the guy that's going to come in and you're going to count on him to be that rock solid starter. But I think a guy that has proven he can play against top competition. But once again, a guy who's most comfortable in the post can attack closeouts to a certain extent. And then defensively, it is probably most comfortable on that post player, big man, but can get, once again, with the size, can often get overpowered or shot over. And then same thing on the perimeter. He can get out there and guard, but not somebody you're going to be comfortable with just guarding maybe a stretch 4 type of player.
One of the things that I think we've had to make a requisite as part of our commentary on North Carolina, specifically looking at the transfer portal, is that Ven-Allen Lubin is not a replacement for Armando Bacot. But what I do think is interesting to look at here is with the losses of Bacot and Ingram, and we talked about this a little bit on our last show, with the losses of Bacot and Ingram, North Carolina has to find some rebounding from somewhere. Sean, do you feel pretty comfortable that Lubin can jump in instantly and at least help offset some of that loss?
I think he can definitely offset it. Once again, a pretty strong offensive rebounding percentage last year, not out of the world, but I think maybe can stem the tides from UNC fully dropping off from an offensive rebounding perspective. And then once again, defensive rebounding, if he is able to get the right position, between the strength and the length, he can definitely help control the glass to a certain extent. But if they're going against teams with 2 tall athletic bigs or things of that nature, once again, a lot's going to be how he's situated and who else is in the lineup with him. I think it stems it. It doesn't fully solve it, but one of his strengths offensively was once he did get the offensive rebound, he was great at finishing. Really high percentage per the synergy ranking. So even though he is a little undersized and you do see him get a shot blocked every now and then, I mean he knows how to finish, and he's crafty around the rim, I guess you can say.
I appreciate that. Sherrell, I think one of the big things that we've learned about Hubert Davis in his short time at North Carolina, specifically with regard to how he handles these microwave recruiting cycles and getting guys in from the transfer portal, he harps on fit, and he places a high level of value and almost a premium on fit, sometimes over some other qualities. How does Ven-Allen Lubin fit with this Tar Heel roster?
By all accounts, well, I think that will be determined as time goes on, exactly how good of a fit it is. But I know in the initial conversation that both sides have been pleased with what's been said, and both sides have a pretty good feel for each other. I do think we can share that Jerry Stackhouse has been involved, and I think he's been kind of a bridge between. Of course, he was let go at Vanderbilt, and he wanted Lubin, his guy, who he brought in from Notre Dame when Mike Bray resigned. He wanted him to land at a good spot with good people who are going to help develop him and help him become the best player he could possibly be. And I think Stackhouse recognized that Hubert Davis and his staff can help Lubin accomplish that. And that was one of the reasons he ended up at UNC. But I think you look at the places that he's been, Notre Dame and Vandy, and it's kind of funny. Like UNC's two transfers have both come from Nashville. It's like do they just like does UNC staff just like go in there and get in the hot chicken? What's going on there? But um, I think between the two schools that he's been at, between um, the key things that he's interested in and things that they've talked about, yeah, I do think it's a fit. And people will laugh a little bit or think that UNC is being pretentious by talking about fit. But I think Hubert Davis in his 3 years as being a head coach, he had 1 year where the team, kind of galvanized and came together and, went on a heater. And he had another year where the team just never really came together. And then he had a year where the chemistry was almost perfect. So I think he's seen kind of the gamut of what a team could look like from a chemistry and fit standpoint. And I don't think he ever wants to relive that 2022 2023 season. And so he's going to be he's going to give a little extra weight to fit moving forward. And I think fans just have to accept that. If there's a situation where two players are pretty comparable, or maybe there's a player who's slightly more talented, he's probably going to go with the one who's a better fit than he is the one who's slightly more talented. Now, I'm not talking about a huge degree of talent difference, but if it's pretty comparable, he'll go with fit. That is huge for UNC moving forward. He's talked about it kind of ad nauseum about last season and how much fun it was for him and the coaching staff and the players and how it re-engaged him in a belief that you can have a college basketball program, not just a team. And so that's going to be paramount moving forward for him. And everybody is going to have to check the box to some degree. He's not going to turn down, an amazing player because the fit isn't 100, but it's going to have to be, 80, 85, something like that.
How would you and we're not grading yet. Again, we're very big on not grading until you get a finished product with regard to this roster. But recognizing that North Carolina had to kind of do a 180 here and like you said before, reset their board. How would you rate the process of getting the conversation started with Lubin, getting him on campus, and then getting him here? How would you how would you rate that? Again, I'm kind of speaking back to a lot of the hand wringing and the anxiety and heartburn that fans have had, and rightfully so. How would you kind of rate the way this whole process has gone? Since it's really only taken a little over a week or so.
I would say that's a bit of a double-edged sword because the reason they were in this position is because they weren't able to, for a variety of reasons, some due to them and some not due to them, they weren't able to close on the centers that they looked at before. However, I think as far as pivoting, Omori committed last Sunday, and now you have Lubin committed already. That's a pretty quick pivot to identify two or three guys that you really liked, start conversations with them or continue conversations with them, schedule a visit, get a visit in, and get a commitment. I mean, that's pretty quick, and that's how the portal operates. And I think what you see is a lesson already learned from the previous recruitments in this portal cycle. In that there's probably other guys they could have waited a little bit longer on and said, let's go for this. Player X. I love Player X. He's always the greatest player of all time, Player X. Let's wait for Player X and see what he's going to do, whether it's next week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks. And they could have been hung out to dry because Player X could have got an offer he couldn't refuse, like the kid at Washington, and gone elsewhere. And then they're kind of stuck. Whereas with Lubin, and I think to me, this kind of speaks to him from a UNC staff perspective, from a basketball perspective. He's just super, super solid. And like, if you can get someone who's super, super solid, considering what's happened before, I think you go ahead and grab them and then figure out the rest if there is anything later. So I would say it's a good pivot. It's a pivot that you have to um, recognize was caused by them not getting previous players. However, sometimes that stuff works itself out. This is not a direct comparison. I'm just thinking of one off the top of my head, but Samardo Samuels and now I'm going to forget his name. Samardo Samuels and Devon Rowe were done and finished to Carolina, and that was going to be the next two big men at UNC. This is back in the day for those younger folks, and then they weren't. And so what did Roy Williams do? He pivoted to Ed Davis and Tyler Zeller. Now, obviously,
and then got a ring with him.
And got a ring with him. Obviously, a different level of player, but sometimes those misses, I'm trying to think of the kid. I'm getting old, Joey, and some of the names I used to be able to recall really quickly. Marcus Page was against this kid, the point guard from 2012.
LJ Rose.
LJ Rowe, thank you, Joey, from Texas. Yes. So again,
Sean's giving me props. That's all I needed.
So sometimes, again, these things sometimes work out. I'm not comparing Lubin to Tyler Zeller or Ed Davis or Marcus Page, but sometimes, the God bless the broken road kind of deal. I think that
Wow.
could be a situation with UNC. We'll see what happens.
All right. Well, the Rascal Flats fans in our audience will appreciate that. Sean, I want to ask you, and I'm putting the screws to you a little bit here, but I want to ask you, what does a fit look like to you with regard to projecting minutes for Lubin next year? And I'm not going to ask you to put those minutes in a position, but what do you think a minute breakout for him looks like if everything is gelling the way that the staff kind of wants by, say, conference season?
I'll go in the 18 to 22 range. He was at 28 minutes last year at Vanderbilt. Looking at Withers, he was at 25 minutes at Louisville before coming to UNC, and I think finished right around 12 to 13. So I think in an ideal case, 18 to 20. Well, ideal case is he turns into the guy that they would love to have, and he's getting 30 minutes. But I think a positive, realistic case is 18 to 22 minutes. I think there will be a decrease, but going back to the last podcast we did and trying to look, okay, what's after Cliff, and I'd say I'm usually more the glass is half empty type of guy, but in this situation of just focusing on that scoring, really the scoring talent you're going to have at that one. I'm going to project Cade Tyson up a little bit, 1 through 4, the 1 through 4 spots. And what you really needed was depth in that front court. Washington, standout offensive player last year in very limited minutes. A lot of work to do on the defensive end and on his body. Zayden High still, almost entering his freshman year again. So to get a guy that has played season minutes in the SEC, was able to produce offensively and hold his own against a lot of different 4s or 5s of different sizes, athletic ability, etc. I think was a pretty strong get at this point in time, looking at the current situation. But I definitely would expect the minutes are going to come down, and I think early on it will be him trying to fit in, almost similar to Withers by the end of the season. When he came in, he knew exactly what his role was, and he was really excelling at that role. And I think that will be part of the early season of trying to figure out how do these guys play together, what is the role. But once again, I think adding that depth is the most important piece for what UNC needed to do after losing out on the top targets for a center.
Roger that. I would also encourage everybody, if you haven't, there is video floating around of his Lubin's highlights of the past season. I do think something clicked for him later in the year because he started kind of figuring things out offensively and defensively, and was finishing with some pretty strong double numbers towards the end of last season.
I would just say, at some point, there's a fair amount of the full game videos. To just pick one and watch it, and you can see what his strengths are, what his weaknesses are, and I think can have a level opinion on what he might do. Obviously, highlights always tend to show the positive things, but I think just watching the full game helps. But over to Sherrell.
I was gonna say, yeah, offensively, he can definitely help them. I think the question marks really with him, and then I would say the rest of the big men is, how are you going to rebound, and how are you going to be able to defend? Armando Bacot, again, you can't replace him with one person, so they're trying to replace him essentially with 4 or 5. And he got really good, at switching, at cutting things off, at drop coverage, hedging. He was good at everything by the end of his career, and I think that's going to be really key. So if you're Hubert Davis, you go to these guys that they have right now. You go to Jalen Withers, Zayden High, even James Brown. You go to Lubin, Cade Tyson, Drake Powell, Ian Jackson. You say, look, man, if you want to play, you've got to defend and you've got to rebound. Whoever does that the best, they'll get their shots. They'll get their opportunity. But, you're missing, 17 or 18 rebounds per game, and you're missing 2 big, strong defenders. So they're going to they're going to have to replace them with all those guys. And I think for any of those guys, it's a real opportunity to carve out a niche and say, I'm the rebounding guy. I'm going to play because I'm going to go and kind of have reckless abandon, jump all over the floor, and grab rebounds and do whatever the team needs. If you're able or willing to do that, there's going to be an opportunity for you to play because UNC needs it so badly. And I think the other thing is that Jalen Washington, now it's kind of like, okay, you've had 2 seasons to really get back healthy, to gain experience, and now if you wanted to be, it can be your time. If you can gain weight in the off season, if there's a little increase in that lateral mobility, if you get a little nastier in the paint and trying to grab rebounds and everything, there's a chance that he can play a really huge role for this team. Now, the thing about signing Lubin is that you don't have to have Jalen Washington do that. I think that's one of the good things. But if you did that, then that would free up a lot for UNC and allow them to be a little more flexible and versatile in how they play. So to me, again, for those guys, and we're not sure what else they're going to do next, but for those guys already in, like, carve out a niche rebounding. Like, go watch Dennis Rodman and like tell Sean May to just push you around in the paint as much as possible in these off-season workouts that start here in the next week, and really become a rebounder, really become physical, because you're going to have a chance to play.
I think it's really neat that that's what you shared towards the end of the show, Sherrell. Because if we remember when Hubert Davis first came in, his introductory press conference, he talked about wanting to bring some NBA things to North Carolina's style of play, and that's very much an NBA thing. Is that coaches deploy guys with very specific things in mind on what they expect out of them. Guys have certain traits. There's guys that are 3-and-D type players. There are guys that are just putting out there to goon it up. I mean, that's the type of thing that I think you're describing here as to how North Carolina may be able to find some versatility just with the bodies that they now have on the roster. We've kind of got all the I think we've got all the milk out of this here cow. But to reiterate, Ven-Allen Lubin transfer from Vanderbilt, 2 years left to play in college if he so chooses to use them. Has committed to Hubert Davis and the Tar Heels after visiting campus. Sherrell, Sean, as always, I appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and go out on a limb and say that probably visiting Johnny T-Shirt is what got Lubin to commit. We've seen that happen with commitments before, where they walk in, they see Johnny T-Shirt's selection, they get overwhelmed by the just the helpfulness and the great attitude of the staff there, and they're like, "Hey, I want to be in Chapel Hill now because I'm this close to Johnny T-Shirt." And Inside Carolina Premium subscribers know you get that extra 10% off. So use that right there on East Franklin Street, JohnnyT-shirt.com. And also, news came down this week that the ACC actually, at one of their conferences, actually paid Joseph Splitscreen from the Worldwide Trailer to come in and speak about how the league can get more teams into the NCAA tournament. And if you're trying to think about how you can operate efficiently towards, the big picture, I would have just called Congruity. I would have just gone to Congruity HR, and they can help you be a little more efficient, and would definitely not be as much of listening to a blowhard as listening to Joseph Splitscreen from ESPN and his bracketology garbage. Congruity HR /Tar Heels. Get that free assessment. Let them find out, or let them help you find out what they can do to help your small business. They're local presence. They're going to take care of you. The national guys are not going to take care of you the way they will. This is a real, authentic group of people that are going to believe in your business and want you to focus on the things that you care about in your small and medium-sized business. CongruityHR.com. Check them out. We appreciate them. Boys, until next time, appreciate y'all making yourselves available for this here Emergency Podcast. Ven-Allen Lubin joining the Tar Heels for next season. For Sean Moran, for Sherrell McMillan, shout out to John Siegley for producing. I am Joey Powell. We'll be back next time on a regularly scheduled Coast to Coast podcast here on InsideCarolina.com.